Okay, so thank you guys. This week's share is on the halachas of suicide. Just quick disclaimer is that this is something that our world and community is certainly not immune to. And as a tzibur, I think we have a responsibility to look out for those that are depressed, broken, etc. And by befriending them, talking to them, being nice to them, reaching out to them, I think we have the ability of stopping some further suicides. Okay, it says in Parshas Noach, Perek Tes Pasuk Hey, Ach es dimchem nafshesechem nidrosh. As the Gemara in Baba Kama Tzadi Aleph says, Rabbi Lezer Darshans, that this is the Isser of suicide. Nafshesechem, your nefeshes in plural, their nefeshes is not just killing a regular person is an Isser, but it's also an Isser in killing yourself. Suicide is an Isser. Now, what is the nature of that Isser? So, the Chassam Sofer and the Beis Meir, I should really say the Beis Meir because he's more authoritative, the Beis Meir and the Chassam Sofer, it is a stam Isser. It is not an Isser of Ritzicha. It is a stam. Sorry, I said it the wrong way around. I'm sorry. According to the Beis Meir and the Chassam Sofer, it's an Isser of Ritzicha. It's an Isser of murder. Just like you have an Isser to murder somebody else, you have an Isser to murder yourself. You don't own your own body, and therefore you have an Isser of murdering your own body. According to the Minchas Chinuch, it's actually not an Isser of murder. It's an independent Isser. It's definitely still Isser, but it's not the Isser of Ritzicha. There's a Rambam that says that somebody who commits suicide, he is chayev misa b'dei shemayim. Now the obvious question to that is, come on, that seems like a ridiculous statement from the Rambam. How could the Rambam suggest that somebody who committed suicide is chayev misa b'dei shemayim? Too late. So the Chayra Pshan the Rambam is trying to show you the nature of the Isser. Yes, it's not going to be possible to apply the punishment, but it's not an Isser of Ritzicha. It's a different Isser. Because Ritzicha, you're chayev mitzvah b'dei Adam. And this is a Isser that you be chayev Ritzicha b'dei Shemayim, so the Chayra wants to say that it's a different form of Isser. L'maisa, Roiv Poskim will take on that it is Ritzicha. So the Pashas we're going to go with is that it is Ritzicha, but it's good to note that it's not L'kuli Alma, that it's Ritzicha, but the Pashas is that it is Ritzicha. And there will be halachical ramifications as we will discuss. Also to note, a little interesting one, the Beis Yosef in Bedek Habayis says in the name of the Orchos Chaim that somebody hangs themselves, that is also part of this Isser. L'chayra, the way that's not obvious in the Chiddush, is the Lashon of the Plastic is for your blood, dimchem. And by hanging, even though there is no blood, it still fits into that Isser, don't make the mistake. Okay. Now, there's a Mishnah in Masechtas Smachos, which, by the way, just a side note, what is Masechtas Smachos? There are these Mishnayos that didn't quite make the cut of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And these are the Mishnayos that if you quote these Mishnayos, you sound like you very stark and you know everything. It's a Mishnah of Reb Nassan, it's Derech Eretz Zuta. It's these types of things that you sound like you really know what you're talking about when you quote. So, this is one of them. It's a Mishnah in Smachos. In these Mishnayos that didn't quite make it into the Shisha Sidra Mishnah. And it's talking about Avelis. Smachos is, Lashon Saginar, so to speak. So the Mishnah in Smachos says that somebody who commits suicide, there is no olam haba for that person. The person, we don't sit shiva for the person, and the person doesn't have kfura in the regular part of a Jewish cemetery. They have to be buried like on the other side of a fence or something like that. So we have very strict punishments, so to speak, for the person that commits suicide. However, if he's somebody that is tirdas das, he's somebody that had some mental issues, then it's still usher. The isser doesn't change, but those halachas don't apply. Now, there's another thing that pretty much almost all the place can bring down, is that when somebody has committed suicide, we assume there was some form of tirdas adas. There was they lost their mental capabilities at the time that they committed suicide. They went off the rails when they committed suicide. So it creates a little bit of a catch-22. If these halachas only apply by somebody that didn't have mental instability, and we assume that people that had suicide had mental instability, so when is this Mishnah actually applicable? So a rare case would be, for example, you have somebody that has, and this has existed historically with certain philosophers, or you have some people with like the mindset like I shouldn't be wasting the world's resources, and they have like a Baal Shita on some strange Shita on why they commit suicide, so they will fit into that. But most people that are committing suicide is based on some form of severe depression or mental instability. The Rabbi Marcus, he's quoted, I'm not exactly sure who he was, but he's quoted as, I think it might be the same one as Marcus Yam, is quoted as saying that even for financial hardship, that's considered losing your mental, they used to say always when the stock market, by a big stock market crash, there were people jumping out of their windows in Wall Street. Happened many a time. So that would be considered, if you're a Margolius, even something that we would not consider, once again, it's still usher, but these halachas wouldn't apply in such a scenario. Rabbi Shlomo Eger says in the name of the Chacham Tzvi that even if somebody jumped off a boat to drown himself, we assume in the time between from when he jumped to when he actually drowned, he will chayir teshuva, and once again we wouldn't apply these halachas. Some even want to say, if you jump off a tall building, from the time that a person jumps till the time the person would land, we would assume that teshuva was done, and these halachas would not apply.
Mm-hmm.
So it's.
And he didn't do teshuva?
Well, we don't know whether he did teshuva.
Let's
So
say
if
he didn't do teshuva.
let's say he was what you call, he had his video playing. I mean, you can see it nowadays.
Live streaming.
A guy's live streaming it and saying, awesome, I want to do this again while he's going down. Once again, if you don't have one of the other heterim, then these halachas would apply. But if you have the heterim, which you usually have, the Baal Shita jumped out while live streaming, then we wouldn't. Then there'd be no shiva, etc. Fine. Well, once again, in these cases, it's obviously still usher, but we're just discussing whether these whether these other things would apply. Now, we're going to get to cases which are, we start off thinking about this, what's really negeya. We'll get to cases that are actually a little bit more theoretically negeya. Now, before we get into all those individual cases, let's go through the different cases that we see in Chazal of suicide and see if we could explain why those were potentially allowed. So, one very famous case is of Shimshon. We got a famous song, Zechorei Nina, based on that. Shimshon was tied to the poles. He already lost his strength. He asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu, he was in a Colosseum, a big stadium filled with the Pelishtim, and he asked the Kadosh Baruch Hu for the strength to rip down the pillars, to collapse the stadium, and kill the Pelishtim, but he was going to be killing himself as well. So the question is, was Shimshon allowed to do that? Because the Chayr was an act of suicide while doing that. So it's interesting, there's not so much written from the Mefarshim on this, but there's a couple potential reasons to explain why that would be allowed, what Shimshon did. So one thing that you could say is the Pelishtim were looking to kill the Yidden. So by killing these thousands of Pelishtim, he was going to be saving lots of Jews in doing this. which we're going to see soon isn't even so clear in its own right that that's allowed, but there's a potential that by killing those Pelishtim, you're allowed to do that to save for other Jews. The problem with this approach is it's relatively indirect, meaning those Jews weren't at that current time, those Pelishtim weren't currently looking to kill the Jews, but it is a possibility. There's another possibility that it was an inyan of Kiddush Hashem, or Chil Hashem, what was going on, and because he was a Navi being made fun of, so to speak, and now by him taking down all these Pelishtim has been Mekadosh Hashem, how you mess with the Navi and thousands of you die, so there could have been a Kiddush Hashem factor. We're going to also see there's a potential of when somebody's being tortured, they're in a lot of pain, and their death is imminent anyways, there may be a potential heter of suicide. So we'll see these. In this one example, it's not clear which heter was used, so it's not going to really prove any of them so clearly, but there's a couple of potential possibilities as to why that was allowed for Shimshon. Now we're going to get on to the most famous story in Chazal of suicide. That's the story of Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech, when he was also the Pelishtim, were attacking. So he, according to some shittas, they were just on him and he was going to be taken. Some shittas, he already actually got hit by an arrow. Different ways of understanding the psukim. And he asked his shamash, his sword bearer, whatever the guy's called, the guy who was his helper, kill me. And he refused. So Shimshon took his own knife and fell onto his own sword. I said Shimshon, I meant Shaul HaMelech, sorry. And fell onto his own sword, and he killed himself. And his shamash went on to do the same to himself. The question is, was this allowed and how was it allowed? So, Shaul HaMelech was known to be a Navi, a Tzaddik. How is something like this allowed? The Chayra, it's suicide. The Chayra should fit into the Isser. So there's a lot of different pshatim given. So the Das Zakenim has two pshatim. The first pshat is Shaul did Avera. He was wrong. But we don't see Chazal criticizing him. That's the problem with this pshat. Pshat number two is, since that they would have actually tortured him until he would have done Avodah Zarah. So he, to protect himself from Avodah Zarah, which is Yarg Val Yaver, therefore at this point he killed himself in advance. The third pshat is, and by the way, actually before I even get into the third pshat, this was throughout the history of Klal Yisrael, specifically in the Crusades, this was a very relevant shayla about whether to kill yourself if you're going to be tortured to keep Christianity, whether or not you should kill yourself. It was even machlokes between the Balei Tosfos. What is the correct thing to do? And there's even many recorded events of people killing themselves. Even the Tor, his wife and mother-in-law, and mother-in-law's husband. I don't think it was his wife's biological father, but his wife, his mother-in-law, and mother-in-law's husband. They killed themselves not to be converted to Christianity before the Crusades got to the town. So that is something that really happened, and the mice of the poskim at that time came out. I mean, there was a big machlokes, but it ended up being that the accepted psak l'kuliyama at the end of the day was that you're not supposed to do this. But there was, as we see, a shita, the Das Zakenim claims that that's what Shaul did. The third example, the third pshat is Matnas Kahuna, which says he did it to prevent Chil Hashem, because it would have been a Chil Hashem for the Jewish king to be taken as a captive. The fourth opinion, which is the Shiur Knesset Gedolah, they say that the day before Shaul brought back Shmuel HaNavi from the dead, and they got a nevuah from Shmuel HaNavi the day before, or a message, whatever you want to call it, the message from the dead from Shmuel HaNavi, that tomorrow you're going to die. Therefore, he knew he was supposed to die that day. So once he knew he was supposed to die, now it became like suicide was kind of fulfilling the nevuah that he got. So it wasn't considered suicide because this is what he was supposed to do. He got it as this message from Shmuel. The sixth pshat is, the fifth pshat is the Yam Shel Shlema, that he knew that if they would have captured him, then what would have the Jewish people done once their king was captured? They would have waged a war against the Pelishtim. And Shaul realized that would have been a futile war. And tens of thousands of Jewish people would have died, soldiers would have died as a result of waging this war to try to capture him back. And therefore he killed himself to prevent that from coming, and he actually did it to save tens of thousands of Jews. And the sixth pshat, which we're going to see is potentially the most negea, is the pshat of the Besamim Rosh. The Besamim Rosh says, since he was in extreme pain, and I already alluded to this by Shimshon, since he was in extreme pain, and he was going to die soon anyways, therefore, at that point, there's no issue of suicide, and you could kill yourself. Now, just a little history about the Besamim Rosh. The Besamim Rosh is in the 1700s, I believe it was. I forgot the name of this Rav. Maybe 1800s? I think maybe 1800s. There's some Rav, I forgot what his name is, who found the lost teshuvas of the Rosh. Now, the Rosh is of one of the most top three authoritative Rishonim in Psak. And this Rav found the old teshuvas of the Rosh. Now, at this point, most people claim that he didn't really find the old teshuvas of the Rosh. He made them up. And he wrote his own teshuvas, his own shitas, and he wrote the Rosh on the top, which gave him much more weight. It's very debatable whether they had this reverse plagiarism or they didn't. That's debatable. And even if it was his, he obviously was a tremendous Talmud Chacham to be able to write this up in the first place, but there's a very big difference of the authority of this Rav in the 1800s versus the actual Rosh. Because if this is the Rosh, we could certainly rely on the Halacha. If it's not really the Rosh, and it's a Talmud Chacham in the 1800s, then Lav Davka could rely on it. So it's the Besamim Rosh. So, and different people have always taken different attitudes as to how much weight to give the Besamim Rosh. So the Besamim Rosh says this idea, death is imminent, lots of pain, suicide is allowed. Now where this is actually, I'm going to jump to it, because once we focused on this, I'm going to get back to everything else soon. But there's many cases of somebody, late stage cancer or something like that, and this is, in the world, and especially in liberal countries, it's becoming more and more common, the assisted suicide of people that are in a lot of pain, sick, terminally ill. So if we would postulate this Besamim Rosh, then in theory we would allow that terminally ill person who is in pain to go forward with the assisted suicide. But Lamaisa, we're going to see that we don't really allow that, but it would have tremendous nafkaminas la'alacha. And that's where a lot of this sugya really plays out, Lamaisa. Now, next story in Chazal. Next story in Chazal is one of the Asar Rugei Malchus, Chanani ben Trajan, who he was wrapped in a Sefer Torah, and they put wet sponges or wet wool around his heart to keep him alive longer. So while he was burning, the executioner said to him, why don't you open your mouth to allow the fire in, whatever the exact mitzias is, and that will kill you quicker. And Rabbi Chanani ben Trajan refused to open his mouth to let the fire in to hasten his death. Then the executioner said to him, if I take away that wool, will I get bizaycha to get olam haba? Rabbi Chanani ben Trajan said yes. He took away the wool, and Chanani ben Trajan died from the fire. And then the executioner, he himself, jumped into the fire. And Chazal say, not Chazal, there was a Baskal that came out and said that they were both zeicha to olam haba. Now there's a troubling story, because Rabbi Chanani ben Trajan, why was he allowed to have the wool taken away? L'chayra, that is an act of suicide. And furthermore, why is this executioner allowed to jump in the fire? That l'chayra is an act of suicide. And therefore, why are they getting olam haba right after their acts of suicide? And furthermore, the if it, meaning why can't he open up his mouth? Why is opening up your mouth a problem, but having the guy remove the wool, that's perfectly fine? What's going on here? So, we have to say that there's a chiluk, and a lamdish chiluk between the two. Opening your mouth is actively allowing the fire in. That's an active act of suicide. Whereas removing the sponges is taking away that which is preventing the fire from killing. The removing of the sponges didn't kill him. It's the fire that killed him. It's manias menoi, taking away that which is stopping the killing to happen, and that would be allowed. And by the way, this has a lot of practical halachic implications in end-of-life discussions, as we'll get to in a minute. Somebody's in severe pain, whatever it is, and they want to, even if they have a 10-20% chance of survival, but they can't deal with this chemo. Are they allowed to say, I don't want the chemo anymore? The answer is yes. In certain scenarios. I'm not saying as a general klal. Obviously, every case, you ever get to this type of situation, every case needs to be individually discussed with the Rav and whatever. But from the aside is, yes, you'd be allowed to, based on this story, because the taking away the chemo isn't what's killing this person, it's the cancer. So that would, in theory, be allowed based on this heter. Next, we have a Gemara in Gittin, Nun Zayin Mebeis, that quotes the story of 400 children that were on a boat on the way to Rome by the Chorban, and they jumped into the water. And the Gemara seems to bring it l'shvach. So l'chayra, that case was fine, because it seems to be, although it's not absolutely clear, but it seems to be that they were being brought there, and there's a chashash of aveira being done to them. The Gemara pretty much says it, that there was going to be znus, which is yarg val yaver, and even though it's not pashid that for women yarg val yaver applies, and it's not pashid that katan marchayev to kill themselves for the shlosh averis hamuris. So it's all, not every piece of the puzzle fits so pashidly, but at the end of the day, the simple explanation seems to be that they were able to kill themselves because they were headed to the three averis, one of the three averis, which is Yarg Val Yaver. Now, another case that we have of somebody killing themselves is Chana and her 7 sons. After Chana's 7 sons were killed, she went to the roof and she jumped off. Why was she allowed to do that? L'chayra, it's an isser of committing suicide. So the Meiri wants to explain that she thought that they were going to force her to do avodah zarah. Yeah, to me that sounds like a mechudesh to kapshat in the story, because they killed the kids without forcing them to do avodah zarah. So why did Mechatesh that they were going to force her? Maybe. The Eitz Yosef says that she actually did the wrong thing. But once again, none of the negative halachas would apply in a situation like this. It's understandable the grief that was caused her, and she did it. So definitely mental distress, no question about it. But he actually says it was wrong. And this, I'm going to lead into, this might be another heter, but this actually probably doesn't apply for Chana. So the story of Chana is a little bit of a tzarchinim, and we have the Meiri's approach. Now, what about suicide out of tshuva? Am I allowed to commit suicide as an act of tshuva? So, we all know the story of... Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says you're allowed to commit suicide out of tshuva, and he based it on the story of Rabbi Elazar ben Bardudai. The story is he was Baal Aveira, and the Zaina said something to him, whatever, it hit a spark, he went to the top of the mountain and cried until his neshama left. So Rabbi Yehuda Chassid learns that story, that he committed suicide at a tshuva, and the Gemara praises him. It says that, in fact, the Baskal came out and says he got Olam Haba. So, from the fact that we approve of that story, Vidui Chassid says you are allowed to commit suicide as an act of teshuva. I would add, that we could use that explanation to explain the executioner in the story of Chana ben Shradim. How is he allowed to jump into he's obviously committed some pretty bad aveiros. His job has been burning Jews for keeping Torah, So as an act of teshuva, he did it, and it would be allowed. Just to point out before I get too far, the modern poskim say, no way, Jose, we cannot do this nowadays. But Lamaisa, that was the psak of Yehuda Chassid. Fine. What about the people of Masada? I remember I went to, many years ago, I went to the Masada light show. Ever did that, anybody? No? I went to the Masada light show. It's on the other side of Masada. And I remember they're going through the whole story, and they come up to the heroes. Finally, when the Romans were for sure going to break through, they all killed themselves. And it was portrayed as an act of heroism. And I remember thinking to myself, why is that allowed? So it's interesting, we only know about the story of Masada from historians, Josephus and other historians. But we don't actually, it's not brought at all in Chazal. I would like to suggest, I don't know if I'm correct on this, but the reason why it never made it into any Memor Chazal, any Kinnis, any of that type of stuff, is because I want to suggest that what they did was wrong. It was usser, but they were in very trying times. It was a very difficult situation, and we're not there to highlight and call them out for their doing the wrong thing in a very tough situation. But I would like to suggest that they did the wrong thing, but Chazal is just not focusing on it. That's not who we have to call out, so to speak, because it obviously was very trying times. That's my suggestion. I don't know if I'm right. Fine. So somebody who has a painful cancer or something like that, and they don't want to live anymore. So are they allowed to take a pill that will kill them? No. Chana ben Shradim was not able to open his mouth to let the fire in. You can't take a pill that will numb your body and put you to death. But as we said, to stop the chemo, that you could. Once again, obviously situations. It's not the right thing to do for somebody that has a 90% survival rate. It's the wrong thing to do. But if somebody, obviously, each individual situation needs to be viewed. Now, can you undergo a procedure that you know that this procedure will quite possibly kill you? But you're doing this procedure to take away pain or to take away some form of a disability. So could you do this dangerous procedure to take away pain or a disability, but there's a chance that you're going to die in this procedure? Is that procedure allowed? And this is very negay. This totally happens. People go through they don't want to be on dialysis anymore, and they go through a liver transplant, kidney transplant, but the doctors tell them that, you're likely going to die in I don't know the exact scenarios. There are scenarios where this stuff happens. So according to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, as long as you have a 1% possibility of surviving, as long as there's a possibility of surviving, it's not an automatic death sentence, you are allowed to go through with that surgery. But that's not the kuliyama. A lot of places can say you need a 50% likelihood of survival to go through with that personality. To go through with that procedure. Rabbi Yoshev, I don't know where he gets this number from, but Rabbi Yoshev says you need a 30% chance of survival in order to go through with such a procedure. There's a story. I mean, not a story. This is what apparently the Israeli army says, and especially this was, it still exists, but after in the last 10 years, it's become a much bigger thing. That they tell the soldiers that you're going into Gaza, that if you see you're going to be captured, then kill yourself. I know they were debating, I don't know if that ended up happening, they were going to give every soldier a death pill, that they could quickly take the pill if they see they're going to be captured, just to kill yourself. Or use the last grenade for yourself is the term that's been used. You should kill yourself rather than get captured by the Arabs in Gaza. Now, why did they say this? The reason why they say this is because by the time fighting is over, what happens is it comes time to prisoner exchange, and for whatever strange reason it is, one Jew equals 1,000 criminal Arabs, and therefore they know already from experience that if to get you back, they're going to have to let out 1,000 criminals, and these 1,000 criminals will go on to kill many, many Jews. As we saw, unfortunately, happen with Gilad Shalit and that whole story, there's been many, many Jews that have died at the hands of the Arabs prisoners that were released. So to avoid that, they say, kill yourself. Another point is they're going to torture you to find out as many secrets as they could about the Israeli army, about what they're doing, where they're located, etc. So therefore, they say you should kill yourself, and instead of letting yourself be captured. The question is, what does the Torah say about it? Does the Torah agree that you could let yourself get killed rather than be captured? So, the first place we should really look back is the 6 different pshatim that we had into Shaul HaMelech, which is the common story in Chazal. So if we go through those 6 reasons, so the first reason is that Shaul HaMelech was wrong. So if Shaul HaMelech was wrong to kill himself, so it's going to be wrong for this soldier to kill himself. The second reason that we discussed is they're going to bring him to Avodah Zarah. The Arabs have no interest in getting somebody to do Avodah Zarah. They're not even interested in bringing you to Islam. And even if they were interested in bringing you to Islam, that doesn't have a din of Avodah Zarah. So that wouldn't be a reason to kill yourself. The Matnas Kahuda, as we said, it was to prevent Chil Hashem. I don't think it's specifically a Chil Hashem if they capture. They're doing something bad, but I don't think that doesn't shed a bad light on the Jews, per se. Shiur Kiskadola say that there was a nevuah involved. I don't think there's a nevuah involved here. The Yam Shel Shlomo says that if Shaul was captured, it would have caused many Jewish deaths. That is debatable. One could argue that this will also cause many Jewish deaths, but the counter argument would be that this may be more indirect than the Shaul HaMelech case, number one, and number two is presumably this would cause less Jewish deaths than the Shaul HaMelech, but it's unclear from that Yam Shel Shlomo how many deaths you need. So I would say it's questionable whether we could apply the heter of the Yam Shel Shlomo. I would say we very likely could, but it's definitely questionable. And then the 6th pshat, B'samim Rosh, which was that you're going to be tortured and killed anyways. Tortured in pain, yes. Killed anyways, presumably not. They don't want to kill you. They want to keep you alive and trade you. So that wouldn't apply. There is, by the way, I just want to point out, there's another Tosfos that says you're allowed to commit suicide to stop yourself from torture. So that actually would be applicable here. L'maisa it's a Tosfos, yeah. Well, the B'samim Rosh, it's interesting. So the question is why, and it's actually interesting because why does the B'samim Rosh was talking about immense pain, not specifically torture. So what's the difference between immense pain and torture? Because he was talking about that Shaul was in pain because he was wounded. So he was in pain and he was going to die anyways. The torture is a higher degree than immense pain in that respect. Now, Lamaisa, Reb Zilberstein, and Reb Yashiv both paskin that the Israeli soldier is not allowed to kill himself. Now, to me, it was a little bit of a surprise, I would say, because I would say that you have that Tosfos. And there's also, I mean, maybe argue, but I understand why they wouldn't accept this. But I might argue that this Israeli soldier now has the din roidif. To have the din roidif, you don't need to have negative intent to get the din roidif. To get the din roidiv, you just have to be on the way to killing somebody. So let's say this. Let's give a wild example. You have a guy, he has mental issues. He's psychotic. I hate that guy so much. Yeah, the guy, I don't know, did something really bad to him. Stole his money and ruined his family and killed his father and I don't know what. Yeah? I am going to kill that guy. He knows. Not like I'm just angry. I know how to kill people. I carry a gun. I have a good shot. I know I will kill him. He will die. I will kill him. Interesting question. Can that guy kill himself? Why? Because he's a roidif. He's going to go kill that guy. And when he sees the guy and he's chasing after him and he has his gun drawn, could he go and instead of killing that guy, turn the gun towards himself and kill himself? Is he allowed to do that? So l'chayra, yes. I didn't see this brought down anywhere. But l'chayra, yes. Because l'chayra has a din roidif. And l'chayra, he could kill himself as having a din roidif. I imagine. Obviously, it's better to get a hold of yourself and get yourself. But l'chayra, he could. Can we argue with this soldier? Can we argue that he has a din roidif? And obviously, Rav Yashiv and Rav Zilberstein did not take this on. But I'm just wondering, maybe a din roidif is only when you're in active pursuit. Maybe. Whereas this guy, it's a couple of steps indirect that he's gonna kill them. I don't know how much of a suffix. You know, if you're gonna let out 1,000 Arab prisoners.
That wasn't an unusual case. Often they do kill these guys. Those stories. Famous soldier, and they try to rescue him, and he ended up being killed. Friday night.
So, I mean, then you're going to die anyways. You know, it's a little bit manusha. But yeah, I hear. But the Meister of Yasha didn't accept it. I'm wondering if you could argue that you have a din roidif. Maybe he should kill himself al din roidif, which is quite fascinating. Fine. Next, interesting question. Yeah? Somebody is huge Tam Chacham, 40-year-old Rosh Yeshiva, who has heart issues. The doctors give him 1 year to live because of his heart issues. Yeah, I'm an Amoritz, and I'm a good for nothing. I'm a bum. And I say I want to go and give my heart. I want to donate my heart to this Rosh Yeshiva. And this Rosh Yeshiva, with his thousands of Talmidim, he'll be able to continue being Marbitz Torah for tens of years. B'schus my heart, I want to do it. Am I allowed to do it? Or not. But why not? So Rav Asher Weiss wants to suggest that this would be totally on the machlekes that I brought before between the Beis Meir and the Minchas Chinuch. According to the Beis Meir, it says it's ritzicha, so it would not be allowed. I can't. Who says whose blood is redder? We see that idea by it doesn't make a difference. The caliber of the person, and therefore I can't do ritzicha to myself in order to save the life of that Rosh Yeshiva. But lefi the Minchas Chinuch that it's a stam iser, l'chayra I should be able to do that stam iser in order, which is also debatable by the way, but in order to save the Rosh Yeshiva. But l'maisi comes halach l'maisi we're not allowed to do this. This is more a interesting discussion.
What if they swap hearts?
I think there has to be a time gap. I don't think it's... But maybe, if they would be able to medically do that, it would be very interesting. Then I would say there would certainly be a greater argument that you would be able to do that. Now, yeah, very interesting. By the way, just in general, can I take a bullet for somebody? So, l'chayra, no. L'chayra, I have no right to take a bullet for somebody. I'm doing ritzicha on myself to save the other guy. L'chayra not.
What about shielding a child?
L'chayra not. I mean, don't get me wrong. All these things sound like the right moral thing to do. But if you actually think about it, I'm not talking about risking, by the way. Now, there's two separate things. Risking your life, I'll discuss in a second. Right now, I'm talking about giving your life. Now, giving an individual giving his life to save many, that pashtus, yes, that we see that you could do. We see you could. Shimshon is that pshat. Shimshon was giving his life to save many Jews, and there's a case where the goyim say, "Send out a Jew, or I'll destroy the whole city." So we say we do not send out a Jew to save the whole city, but a Jew is allowed to volunteer to save the whole city. But we seemingly, as far as I've seen, maybe I'm wrong, but as far as I've seen, I have not seen a precedence of giving your one individual life to save another one individual life. Now, what about when it comes to risking your life? So let's break it into categories. Risking your life in a way that you are most likely going to die. That is also bepashtus aser. To risk your life, somebody falls out of the boat into the raging storm. You could jump in to try to save him, but you will probably die. Bepashtus it is aser. What about the case where you will possibly die? It's not probably likely, but there's a significant chance of you dying to go and save the other person. Interestingly enough, the Radbaz holds that actually I'm going to do it. The Radbaz holds that you which way was it again? The Radbaz holds that it's not the right thing to do. You're a chassid shaita, to risk your life to save somebody else. Moshe Feinstein, I forgot which Rishon he's working with. Moshe Feinstein paskins that in a case like that, it is midas chasidus to risk your life to save the other person's life, but you're not mechuyev to save the other person's life when there is a significant chance of you dying. What if there is a minor chance? We have to define in a minute what's the difference between minor and significant. What if there's a minor chance? So the Rabaz says, there you're allowed to. Moshe Feinstein says, there you're mechuyev to. So the way that we pashas paskin like Moshe Feinstein, a little chance, a minor chance, you're mechuyev. A medium chance, there's a significant possibility, but it's not a probability, then you would be not mechuyev to, but it would be midas chasidus. And when there is a probability, then it would be not allowed. Fine. And by the way, if it's definitely, that's even further, it's not allowed. One or two more points. What about a woman, we actually discussed this last week, a woman who is, the child is she's pregnant, and the baby in her stomach, if she goes through with this pregnancy, she will die. That's what the doctors tell you. You go through with this pregnancy, you will die. She has cancer, something or another. If you go through with this pregnancy, you are going to die. She's obviously allowed to abort the baby, as we saw as a Mishnah in Aylis. The question is she allowed to not abort the baby? Can she decide, I want this baby, I want to go forward with this pregnancy, even though it will kill me? Sheval Tasa. So we discourage her generally, but the place can say we can't force her to perform it, because this is a suicide, so to speak, in a Sheval Tasa format, in a passive format, and once it's in a passive format, she has the halachic right that she's allowed to do this. Once again, all these halachas shouldn't be negea. In the history of the Jewish people, Holocaust, Crusades, these types of halachas were very, very applicable in history. And, there's still, God forbid, cases where these things, you have terrorists and etc., where these things could be applicable. And, it's a real thing. But we shouldn't see from any of these things. And that is the sukum, that is the basics of suicide in halacha. Shkech.